Hello, everybody. And I'm saying fáilte, that's welcome in Irish because it's Irish Book Week. I'm really pleased to have our reader here tonight, Ian Duhig, because we invited him to Nottingham last March. I don't have to explain what happened. I'm Deirdre O'Byrne. I've got two hats on tonight, Five Leaves Bookshop and Nottingham Irish Studies Group. Some housekeeping. If you've any general comments or you'd like to tell us where you're tuning in from, please put them in the chat box. We'd be pleased to hear from you. Pippa Hennessy of Five Leaves is keeping an eye on the chat. If you have questions for Ian for the end of the session, we'll have a 10-minute Q&A. Please put those in the Q&A box and I'll pick them out of a hat. And if you think I'm joking, I have a hat. We won't be able to answer them all, I'm expecting, because of 10 minutes. So Ian is going to read from his contribution to a wonderful book on the second generation Irish in Britain. I wouldn't start from here. And then he's going to read some of his poetry and he'll tell you more about himself as he goes along. So welcome, Ian.
Thank you very much, Deirdre. Thank you very much, everybody else. Most of my poetry will flash up on the screen, so you'll see what it looks like in case I mumble. I can sometimes mumble. The first section from the book you can actually read on the Irish Times website. And my essay in it is called The Road, which is significant for all sorts of reasons. So here we go. From the road in I Wouldn't Start From Here. I grew up in what seemed a very well-established London Irish community around Paddington and Kilburn. Kilburn High Road marked the boundary between the London boroughs of Brent and Camden, meaning that on one side pubs sometimes closed half an hour earlier than on the other, so there was frequently an undignified stampede for last orders across it into a hostelry opposite. When we were old enough, and often before, I would meet friends in the Queen's Arms on Kilburn Bridge because it was a Young's house, the best beer in the capital. Further up the road was Biddy Mulligan's, the only pub bombed by Northern Irish Protestant paramilitaries on the British mainland. Beyond that was the Lord Palmerston, but because it was named for an absentee landlord in Ireland, it was boycotted until it changed its name to the Roman Way. Further up still, near where my father worked in Crickerwood, was the Galtymore pub club complex, a great barn of a place where the Sligo flute player Roger Sherlock had been a regular performer in the semi-professional house band. Even so, Nuala O'Connor's Bringing It All Back Home reports him saying, it still wasn't enough to make a living, nothing like it. He also worked, and this is quoting him again, 6 days a week with a pick and shovel, mostly roads, you know, which was hard work. Near the Galtymore was the Crown, which was effectively a labour exchange for Irish construction workers, where cheques would be cashed on pay nights. Driving north on this road, it soon joins the M1 to Leeds, but coming back down for now towards where we lived, you'd soon pass the huge Sacred Heart Church on Quex Road, where on one occasion the parish priest's housekeeper witnessed my friends carrying what seemed to her an inordinate amount of drink into a basement function room, booked to celebrate the departure of one of our number back home to Ireland. She cast a cold eye on the proceedings and declared them a good away win for the devil. My mother learned reams of poetry by heart at school, a feature of its teaching in those days, and she recited it often as she worked about the house, often singing too, although the same tune seemed to carry a wide range of lyrics for her. Very good Irish poets wrote words to be sung in that way, in a manner that her English counterparts rarely did, in the last century anyway. I'm thinking here of the likes of Patrick Kavanagh for On Raglan Road, and the beautiful She Moved Through the Fair, with all but the last verse written by Padraig Colum. Loretto Todd taught at Leeds University when I was there, and in her book, The Language of Irish Literature, she describes Padraig Colum's The Fiddler's House as a play which deals with the recurrent theme in Irish literature, the road and the people who from choice or necessity find themselves upon it. The modern course of Chapeltown Road, from where I live now into Leeds, was made by a blind man, Jack Metcalfe, always striking me as highly appropriate for a centre of economic migration, where people came blindly to earn a living and make a new life on the strength of being able to do so. My father had been a wren boy in his youth, and I mentioned this as a poetry reading once, and I couldn't understand why afterwards people were coming up and congratulating me for my brave revelation. Eventually, one of them explained that they thought I said he was a rent boy. In its own way, this mishearing is indicative of the new world my family entered into in London, where the financial nexus dominated human relationships. I pursued connections between traditional music and poetry occasionally in my work, though this did not always go down well in England. Andrew Duncan, for example, wrote in his hand list of late 20th century poets that my admiration for folk styles chased out literary interest almost altogether. Yet, in the face of all charges of crudity, traditional music can be analysed with a subtlety completely absent from much contemporary poetry criticism. You could talk about Roscommon, Kerry, or West Limerick Barroon styles, and aficionados would know exactly what you meant, while binary divisions as simplistic as Kilburn High Roads have been peddled in UK poetry for decades. In the old joke, an Irish boomerang doesn't come back, it just sings about coming back. Immigrant songlines dream back to a lost Eden, but roads aren't only metaphors, and enduring their hardship called forth a hard Irish wit I love, particularly among the women. Loretto Todd, in her book mentioned earlier, quotes an exchange between two of them suffering down an unmade rough track. One woman tells her friend that they send the stones of it off every year to have them resharpened, and instantly they lose some of their edge to laughter. I want to finish this section with a group poem from one of the workshops I ran for Leeds Irish Health and Homes, published in a small anthology called The Trojan Donkey, which is available from Leeds Irish Health and Homes. The workshop drew on the model of the Song of a Mergin to focus contributions from people mainly of my parents' generation, some of whom were doing well, others not so well. The poem is untitled, and indeed, many of its contributors remained anonymous, but their signature is that marriage of poetry with the tough, lived life I have been describing. If that life and culture proved ephemeral, it wasn't worthless. I am the wind on the sea and in a horse's mane. I am the sound of the ocean and the engine of a plane. I am the tear of the sun and its loveliest flower. I am the hungry family in its emigrant hour. I know your streets aren't paved with gold because I laid them, come rain or cold. Your M1s and your M62s, reading your B&B cards, no blacks, no Irish, no dogs, no Jews. I am the slighted Irish, minding your sick, teaching your children. You called me thick. I worked like a donkey, a Trojan, a slave. I paid my way here. I earned my grave. That's the end of the section from the book, and I'm going to move on to some of my own poetry. The first is called From the Irish, and my relationship with the Irish language is not great. I was the first child born in England, and my elder brothers and sisters could speak Irish. So if they wanted to communicate without us understanding, pas devant les enfants kind of a thing, they would speak Irish. Some people might grow up bilingual under these circumstances. I merely grew up paranoid, took myself off to the Gaelic League and various other places to study the language. Used Dineen, the great dictionary, but he did tend to record words as he thought they ought to be used rather than the way they actually were used by people. So this is it. I have to say I used Dineen. Blame a bad workman, I blame my tools. Dineen's great dictionary. So from the Irish, according to Deneen, a gale unsurpassed in lexicographical enterprise, the Irish for moon means the white circle in a slice of half-boiled potato or turnip. A star is the mark on the forehead of a beast, and the sun is the bottom of a lake or well. Well, if I say to you, your face is like a slice of half-boiled turnip, your hair is the color of a lake's bottom, and at the center of each of your eyes is the mark of the beast, it is because I want to love you properly, according to Deneen. This poem is called Nothing Pie. It really is about how abuse sinks into language, but it's the story of my father and indeed my son. My father is dead now, but on one of his visits, this really started a conversation in a poem. When I told my dad that the locals called a dandelion an Irish daisy, I'd have to admit he looked disenthralled, and soon his farts were Yorkshire nightingales, a dandelion a Yorkshire daisy, a Yorkshire screwdriver banged in his nails, Tipperary invented the riding, and nothing pie meant my Yorkshire pudding. Abide with me, Daddy, be abiding. Now Owen's asking what our garden grows, bad and good, full rhymes when he says pudding. Man will know, I call everything a rose. My son's name is Owen, I suppose I should say. This poem's called Roisin Born. Obviously, Roisin Dove is the name of an Irish song, but Roisin Born here alludes to Yorkshire, White Rose. I think there was a huge influx with the building of the M1 between London and Leeds. I mentioned that before. It was a very convenient route. They did a fantastic job building it under budget, on time. Large numbers of Irish labourers working on it. A lot of whom settled in Leeds because there was, Leeds wanted to be the motorway city of the 70s. And among them was the great Shanno singer, Darach O'Can. So this is about, the end of it, I have to say, is true about what they used to use books for, because I think this is where all my books are going to end up. But this is Roisin Born. The M1 laid, they laid us off. We stayed where it ran out in Leeds, a white rose town in love with roads. Its skin is smooth, its locals rough. Some nights we drink in Chapeltown, a place not known for Gaeilgeoirs, to hear O'Cahan sing Shannos. O'Riordan gave him the crown. Though most were lost by Roisin Dove, all knew his art was rich and strange. In a pub we drowned in our black stuff when we laid the sheepscar interchange. Pulped books help asphalt stick to roads and cuts down traffic sound as well. Between the lines, a navvy reads black seas of words that did not sell. And if you know Leeds, the pub was the Roscoe. Not far from the Roscoe, there is a plaque with poetry in memory of David Oluwale, who was another immigrant who came to Leeds, a campaign of persecution by the police ending in his death. The first job I had in Leeds, the head of security, was one of the policemen who was sent to jail for what they did to him. But this poem is going to go on a plaque and will be put under the existing plaque commemorating David. And Naroko, I think, is explained in the body of the poem. It's a kind of mystical message. Oluwale is Yoruba, for God has come home, but he came to find hell in God's own county. No home but cold Leeds streets or police cells, in his asylum only electroconvulsive therapy. Now, by the air, where David drowned fleeing policemen's boots, his feet light from hunger, my small nomadic cowrie garden grows for one who'd grown to be a shell of himself in this city. An empty cowrie is full as a leg with meanings. God's eyes, they make arrow codes, magic messages, because Efa, Yoruba for six, has the same letters as the word to draw. My six cowries set down here draw David's Christian ghost into Ocean's arms. Water goddess with the name of water, that he too might step into the true meaning of his own name, born back to Africa, where the river of Azul rose. This alchemy of cold fire on the air's earth makes nothing happen, like poetry, yet makes something from nothing for a man treated like he was nothing, making room to reflect on river water running softly. This next poem, Paddingtons, as it says, was inspired by an exhibition and a character in the exhibition. But that exhibition is still online if you want to go and have a look at it. Absolutely fascinating. The racism, obviously, that people of colour experience is infinitely worse than the racism we did experience as Irish and people in Leeds experienced as Irish. But we work together now. Leeds Irish Health and Homes works with the David Oluwale Memorial Association. Mixed Race Irish is a wonderful organisation, and they organised this particular thing, which I was delighted to be involved in. Paddington. And it starts with a quote from the organiser, I should say. Paddingtons. I wonder what does the old phrase, the Black Irish, mean now? Will it still summon ghosts of dark aspect from the Lost Armada? Asked one organiser of the Mixed Race Irish Families exhibition, whose own more successful launch I attend from Leeds online. I think about the black in my surname and of my nephew's skin. Then, because he shared his surname with my first English home, pause over Pablo Paddington, acrobat and equestrian for circuses like Pablo Fanques of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. The Leeds Intelligencer describes Pablo as the Flying African, while the Manchester Courier styles him as the Flying Indian, later the Brazilian phenomenon. Cook's Flying Peruvian, like De Beer, becomes the Leeds Patriots' Siamese aeronaut. York's Herald carries a stranger tale from a city poorhouse inmate, Ellen Lowther, a fellow circus performer of colour, revealing Pablo to be a female. Quote, so dexterously disguised that he deceived Miss King, also an equestrienne of Mr. Cook's circus, till scandal whispered, a novel story. Pablo's real first name was Joseph, like my brother, and his brother, Father George John Paddington, ordained in Haiti, another small colonial island marked by an independent disposition, where their father, George, met their mother, bringing her to Ireland. I wonder, did she, whose name I still search for, bring a magic dowry and teach it there as ring mistress to her holy, flying, various children? I think of her passing Pablo Fanques' Leeds grave, of her son Joseph by Vicar's Croft, Leeds, its old equestrian arena, where he so entranced. Wallflowers at Beverley is really in memory of the great Irish American poet Mike Donaghy, and has the phrase about hyphenated people, which I suppose is the second generation experience. I'm reminded of something Toni Morrison once wrote, where she said, in this country, America means white. Everybody else has to hyphenate, you know. If you're ever in Beverley, it's got more musicians, as it describes here. It's a wonderful piece of architecture. Mike Donaghy was a musician, as it explains in here, and you'll know the songs I'm referring to. More instruments ring these walls than raise the roof for God throughout all medieval Christendom. Stone arcades spring like dancers from the minster floor, keyed to the Lord's calling unsung, Da mihi manum. The Irish call the parchment drum this angel quiets a baron, though she lacks the ordinary beater. Mike held his like a pen above the skin in weight, counting on his own heart to inspire each tattoo. But he might change to flute for quieter audiences, bored without dancers' feet to ground his syncopation. When he charmed them with Rory Val's "Give me your hand," they applauded and rose to the dash of his playing. So Mike's book, Wallflowers, notes offbeat theories that were all God's three-dimensional handwriting, or how a pin's head really can stage angels' Kayleys. Another made dance the mother of all languages. Then it gives all this living hand, Keats's last poem, which dampens my skin like the touch of a felt mute. I'll sit out this stone angel till she leaves her drum, raises and plays something quick on an Irish flute. This is a shorter poem dedicated to Michael Longley. Seed fiddles do exist. They actually, I saw one in a museum, but I mean, we knew about them and they still were used in Ireland until fairly recently. My grandfather's seed fiddle. To guide him in his sowing, white rags are stuck along may hedges on each side of the field. As the scarecrow opens his arms to conduct, he straps himself into his new seed fiddle. Like notes, the seed plays over his furrows to the rhythm of his walk and his bowing. He dreams of reaping even as he sows. Tomorrow, birds will read his music and sing. These are from Alice. I was commissioned a while ago to write things for Alice Through the Looking Glass, and I was interested in Pat, who appears, is always forgotten, the casual labourer. Everybody forgets the casual help, you know, they're always glossed over in stories. And so I decided I'd write about him, which is a true story about me going back to Ireland. It's kind of like about the second generation, the distance that is so quickly established. There was two pieces, but the first one is called Digging, so I'll just read Digging. Alice Liddell's age when she met Carol first, the first time I visited home, as my parents called Ireland all their lives, I found myself in this soft, Edenic mirrorverse with its own secret language, stoats called weasels, white black puddings, and Uncle Pat conjuring up golden potatoes from the dirt that grew only litter and dog shit back in Paddington Rec. In this new world, I too became legendary after asking doubled over Pat to dig me up an apple while he was about it. A byword for how quickly losing the land from under your footfall lost you something from inside your head. So I saw our cracked reflections in Pat, the white rabbit's servant. He interrupts, digging for apples in Wonderland. I saw them too in Tenniel's cartoon apes in Sean Bouis's yellow press, brandishing shillelaghs inscribed Home Rule, swinging on some lost branch of my family tree, grown from an English cutting in a contrary garden. Not my parents' Irish stock, the laughing stock I was there, have been here, and am again in this new hole I dig for myself. And for apples, maybe a rabbit. This poem is called The Llamas Harlem, and it's magical, but I had to say something a little bit about the context of it. In Ireland, the native Irish, the Catholic Irish, tended to not be that bothered about witches, provided they kept away from their butter. That was the main problem, people stealing your butter. In fact, the phrase butter witches lies behind this. It was the Protestant farmers, particularly in the north, which is where I heard some of these stories. When they came over, James the First of England, obviously the idea was that, if you didn't get your power from God, you can only get it from the devil, much harder, and indeed, in the area where I heard the stories that inspired the poem, they had connections with the New World, the mass witchcraft trials, and in Island McGee, which is where I heard these stories, that was the only mass witchcraft trial that took place in Ireland. It's a difficult poem. It's a man whose mind has been disturbed by an experience he hardly understands. So bits of old knowledge he's grasping at like straws to understand what's happened. So, for example, the hare, the cow with leather horns, meaning the hare, that's a very old expression. You can trace it back to the medieval times. I'm thinking also of a song by Paddy Tammy, the great Fermanagh singer, who, when he talks about, in one of his songs, he talks about destroying silver sixpences to make shot and things like this. So this is anyway the Llamas Harlem. After the fair, I'd still a light heart and a heavy purse he struck so cheap, and cattle doted on him. In his time, mine only dropped heifers, fat as cream. Yields doubled. I grew fond of company that knew when to shut up. Then, one night, disturbed from dreams of my dear late wife, I hunted down her torn voice to his pale form. Stock still in the lights from the dark lantern, stark naked, but for the foxtrap biting his ankle, I knew him a warlock, a cow with leather horns. So go into the hair, get you muckle sorrow, the wisdom runs, muckle care. I levelled and blew the small hour through his heart. The moon came out. By its yellow witness, I saw him fur over like a stone mossing. His lovely head thinned, his top lip gathered, his eyes rose like bread. I carried him in a sack that grew lighter at every step and dropped him from a bridge. There was no splash. Now my head's elf shot. I don't dream, but spend my nights casting balls from half crowns and my days here. Bless me, Father, I have sinned. It has been an hour since my last confession. And the poem I'd like to finish with is called A Dream of Wearing String Vests Forever. The title alludes, as I'm sure most of you will realise, to a poem, A Dream of Wearing Shorts Forever, which is a Les Murray poem. But when I was in Ireland a while ago, I stayed with Brendan Kennelly, and we were on a reading tour together. And Brendan is a great man for the string vest. And I remember actually my elder brothers went up in the morning, they would have breakfast and they'd wear string vests. Like, you didn't put your shirt on because you didn't want to get anything on it before you went out and looked like a slob, But I remember also Jack Mapanzi from Malawi. I knew him in Leeds too, and he was showing me some old photographs. And they were all him and his friends. And they were also in string vests. And I thought, this is amazing. This is like, a unit, the sort of slobocracy of the world wear this uniform everywhere. It seems to keep you hot and cold, and I was inspired to write this poem. And as I say, this will be the last one that I read, and then we can ask some questions. For everything that lives is holy. For a string vest does more than only connect. Embodying kinship networks, it is my ancestral tartan, the breakfasting Duhig. Light as a Nora massage or love's gappy language. An ontological conundrum. Nothingness patched being. What is the length of a piece? To what lengths will it go? Only so far it can't flatter, but a must in emigrant's kit. Though born in Antarctica, it's as at home in Africa. And if a gaff at the opera, it's a good sign in hosts of ease with their guests. It grows like the universe, constantly, in every direction. A dream catcher, however stretched, holding its integrity and warmth. Dad's gift, to get the hang of it. Thank you.
Thanks. He looks wonderful. It's a brilliant poem. The string vest, my daddy used to wear one too. And I often
Yeah.
thought what our fathers would make of this becoming a punk, apparel of fashion at some stage. Well, he dyed black usually.
Indeed.
Then, indeed, lots of the punks were second generation Irish, like Johnny Lydon and the Pogues. While we're waiting for the Q&A, if anybody has questions, put them in the Q&A box. I wanted to ask you about prizes. You've written 7 books of poetry and you've been nominated, like the Blind Roadmaker was a Poetry Book Society recommendation. It was shortlisted for the Forward Best Collection and T.S. Eliot prizes. You won the Forward Best Poem prize once. You won the National Poetry Competition. I mean, I know it's very nice to win, but do you have an opinion on prizes? Because they can be controversial.
Oh, I know they are, and some people get very upset about it. I think it depends. We had a prize. We've used prizes, and I've just judged a competition for Leeds Irish Health and Homes, and also indeed for the David Oluwale organisation. And the idea was to advertise causes, if you like, through poetry, and to get people writing. I don't know what it says about people. It certainly focuses their mind and there's money at one end of it, and so you can publicize the individual people were publicized. Some got a little bit of money. They got their poetry looked at, but the main thing is they thought about people like David Oluwale, who was just completely wiped out of the general consciousness of Leeds after his death. For me, I suppose I came completely outside. Almost everybody in poetry now worked in academia. I'm one of the very few people I know. I can think of one other person who lives up the road who doesn't work in academia. And if you're coming from somewhere else, it's like what you do, I think, is unintelligible to the general poetry world, So it's been useful to me, there's no doubt about it. Coming with my rather strange interests and strange background. And I think recently, the prizes, for a long time, I think they reflected quite a limited view of what was going on in poetry. But the number of prizes that have gone to poets of colour recently, men and women, I think has been a great development. And that will be an example of what I mean by drawing attention to something that's going on. Because I think the sort of neglect of poetry by poets of colour in this country has been terrible. And this is one way of actually drawing attention to it. There's a good essay by Sandeep Parmar in the Journal of Innovative Poetry, in a recent one. You can actually see this online. And she talks about prizes and how they fit in relation to this and into minority groups. So I'd recommend, if they wanted to pursue that, they could find a discussion of it.
Send us a link at a later date, Ian, and Pippa will add it to the discussion underneath. But that's a really good answer. I'm thinking of, I like Jennifer Johnson, so now very established as a novelist, but she said she won a prize for her first novel and it really helped, and Emer McBride said exactly the same thing. She had such a job getting published to begin with. And I agree, it draws attention to the unknown voices. I suppose the big problem for us all is when they start giving it to very well-known voices. I don't want to diss Margaret Atwood because she's wonderful, but, Bernardina Evaristo should have won the Booker on her own. I'm getting away from poetry here. Any Q&As? We've got a Q&A coming in. Right. Jenny, you mentioned that your mother knew a lot of poems. Did she or anyone else in your family write poetry before you did?
No, but they did sing. And I think the link between poetry and song is important. Um, I mean, for me, I always connected the two because I think the sort of trajectory of a song I grew up with is an idea of about the length and trajectory of a poem, that the sorts of things you could do within a song, you could do within a poem. And poetry was very respected in my family and very respected in the Irish community at large, you know. Um, and that made a difference. I mean, I was not embarrassed about poetry in the way that, say, other kids might be from, you know, different cultural backgrounds. Um, and I knew the respect which the command of language um, was held in. And I think one of the things about if you have command of language, you're the equal of anybody. You know, you might come from a poor background, but if you have the words, you are the equal of whoever you were addressing, you know. Um, so I was well disposed towards it. I think you know, I think English people very often, young English people, this is something that they're excluded from, where their language will be laughed at. I was actually looking, you know, in this thing that went on in Durham, where people were mocking a woman, a local woman, for her accent. And there was a letter from a poet called Mort. I can't remember his first name now.
Graham?
And he,
It's
Graham,
Graham?
and he was talking, indeed, he was talking about when he went to Durham. I think he left, in fact, you know, they got them to read poetry and he was mocked and told that his language, his accent was not, should not be let loose on English poetry. Tony Harrison talks about it. But that wasn't my experience. Poetry in an Irish accent, to me, was the accent that I heard it in, you know, so that I was better. I felt more relaxed in the world of poetry, even though I felt alienated in other areas.
Anthony asks, your poems often seem shaped and crafted, not just in stanza form, but visually. Do your poems announce their forms early on, or do you go through a number of stanza forms until the final version demands your full attention?
It's a bit of a process of discovery. It's a bit like, you know, I was talking about the Blind Roadmaker. For me, that was also an image for the poet. You know, like Robert Frost said, he never started a poem knowing how it was going to end. And although you might think you have an idea of where you're going, very often that's misleading, and you go in a different direction. So it's about being attentive to the direction that the poem is wanting to take you in. And the visual side of the poem on the page, I think is quite important to me as well, because not all poetry is to be read aloud. You know, Auden has that distinction. There are some poems that are going to stay on the page, really. And quite often, if you have it arranged in a visual way, it's making it clear that this is a page, this is something which is happening on the page rather than the ear. So from that point of view, I have mucked about with the forms before. In my last book, it finishes with a poem which is shaped like a wave. It's called Selkie, and it was designed as an installation for a place that overlooked the sea, where young people used to come and snog, you know. So I wanted to have that specifically in the context of it, as it's about indeed relations, love. So, but and one of the things I like about poetry is you have all of that. You know, it's for the mind, it's music, it's silence. And I think I'm probably going on here, but that probably gives you the general idea, really.
We've got three more questions. So either you give very short answers or you choose between them. Have you written
Right.
any or many songs? Have you worked with musicians? And somebody wants to know, did you know Donald McAuley?
I have written lots of songs, worked with lots of
Different
musicians.
question.
Donald McCauley, he was like the navvy, wasn't he? He was the kind of, yes, indeed. I've read his stuff in the past, and Donald McCauley, I think, was the person who asked the question, why are left footers, why is left footer an insult? When if anybody has ever handled a spade will know that you, if you're right footed, you always use your left foot. I thought is profoundly true. I mean, that seems to be something that, like, you know, a poet would notice. If ever you picked up a shovel, you know that if you're right-footed, you guide it with your left foot. It's the normal thing to do. So a left foot, which is supposed to have these sinister associations, as in Latin, it just doesn't have them, you know.
Isn't it
So
about
yes,
kicking? I thought the
sorry.
phrase was about kicking with the left foot. I thought it was coming from football, but
Oh no, I always thought it was. I've heard it as digging with. He digged with the left
ah,
foot.
oh, you're probably right. Yeah, yeah. Um, so, um, okay, I don't think we'll have time to cover the songs, but Moy is here, your editor, asking about the links to the Black community. She loves that.
Yeah.
You ever write about the anti-Irish, sorry, the anti-Black racism, which our parents' generation condoned through ignorance on encountering Black people once they came to England?
Well, that's in the background of my poem Paddingtons that I read out earlier on. I mentioned it very fleetingly, but my nephew, who was mixed race because my sister had a relationship with a man of color, and the racism that surrounded him, Gary, poor Gary, was something that had a big impact on me. Um, because I was aware of the fact that that racism in a different form was applied to the Irish. So um, when I grew up, I was sympathetic to issues of racism, rather horrified by the reaction of a lot of Irish people to people of color. Um, it's a long and complex issue. There's a book by an American whose name I can't remember, and it's called How the Irish Became White. You know who I mean?
Yeah.
And what he means by that is it's a social thing, you know. I mean, who you identify with. In America now, the Irish and indeed Catholicism are identified with some pretty reactionary social attitudes, you know. But I do think it was very significant to me. I didn't have much chance to talk about it in the context of that poem, but it was significant to me, and indeed probably led me to be interested in the fate of David Oluwale and my continued involvement in those issues.
We're going to have to leave it there, but it's a great
Yeah,
place to leave it for Black History Month.
indeed.
I don't know if Pippa can unmute people so they can join in thanking you. Ian, it's been wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful to hear you and to see you. So thank you very much. And thanks everybody for coming. Oh yes, I should remind you. I interviewed Ian for I interviewed Ian for Five Leaves Bookshop, and that'll be coming online next Tuesday. So if you go over to the Five Leaves events page of the Five Leaves Bookshop YouTube channel, you'll catch him there in the interview, and he'll be talking more about his life, his inspiration, and the rest. So thanks and goodbye. Sloan, which is Irish for goodbye, and Slointe for health. See you.